A rough loss Sunday night for the Pittsburgh Steelers puts them in a bad position in the division, but the questions are really about Kenny Pickett. The season is a lot about how does your first round quarterback develop this year. We're going to talk about that with Adam Bittner. I'm Chris Carter of Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is the North Shore Drive podcast. We're Steeler Nation. We understand it's a rough one, but hang in there where they're going to talk you through all the situations that your team is going through right now, right here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. And welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I am Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner, and we are here on a Monday breaking things down after the Steelers' 16-10 loss to the Miami Dolphins. Remember, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, YouTube. If you see this video on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. You get all three of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes for this, and we have daily content coming out, whether it's Adam's post-game show with Paul Zeiss after Steelers games, whether it's our college shows or our Pitt mailbags. We have a ton of different content. We have high school football, if you love that, in Pittsburgh, all of that right here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And also today's episode is brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage and the power to project one of our Post-Gazette Steelers beat writers into your home or office. Using augmented reality, you can get an exclusive pregame breakdown from a Steelers expert standing right in your living room. Get the latest insights on starting lineups, key matchups, and critical stats at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage. No apps or downloads, just insider access to Steelers updates at post-gazette.com/Acrisure Fan Advantage and get a real edge on this week's action. Adam, the Steelers, I thought, had an edge for a little bit in this game as far as defensively because they had a chance. They entered every offensive possession in the second half with a chance. If they score a touchdown, they take a lead and maybe even win this game, but they just never figured it out in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, frustrating loss in that regard. I think, what was it, the first 5 series were kicks, punts away to the Dolphins when you had a chance to go ahead. A lot of short yardage frustration for this offense, I think, was my biggest. I know a lot of people just want to talk about the quarterbacks, and I think that's natural when someone throws 3 interceptions. But, man, some of those short yardage situations are going to eat at me, for a while, just because, that's what this team's supposed to be good at. That's what you go out and get Najee Harris in the draft for. And it's not just the quarterbacks that aren't working right now. It's pretty much everyone.
Well, and I'll say this. There's times where I think I disagreed with the conservative level of things because part of what the Steelers have to do with this offense is find a balance, and you have to find a way to balance the playmakers and the offensive line's lack of consistency, because the Steelers do have playmakers. Pat Freiermuth is a playmaker. George Pickens is a playmaker. And frankly, when you see a catch like that he had in the second quarter, and he only gets 6 targets for 61 yards in the game, I find that a problem, especially when it's not like if you had some other strength that you were going to. I get it. Like if Najee Harris running the ball right now was crushing teams, I get it, but it's not. And and I think Najee Harris is doing what he can with what's given to him. Teams are still flying to the line of scrimmage, and people talk about, it's not a loaded box. It doesn't matter if if 3 linebackers and 2 safeties are flying up to the ball each time you might get a touch. That's something that you're going to have to deal with, and that's something that the quarterback or someone else has to throw past. But I mean, at the end of the day, Adam, early on, I thought that Kenny Pickett's biggest mistakes were, mental, as far as there were guys open in the middle part of the field, beyond the sticks, at the sticks, that he wasn't even looking at. There were guys. And then, late in the game, the 2 interceptions he threw in the fourth quarter. I thought the second interception, that was just a tough spot because your offense puts you behind the sticks with 2 procedural penalties, and you're a rookie trying to force something. That's tough. But the third interception, you got a situation where, hey, you got an open lane, you can run, get a first down, get out of bounds, keep fighting on that drive, and you threw it in a really bad spot. And I know some of it was a miscommunication part on Deontay Johnson and him just going in different directions, but still, like, those are just situations where you need your quarterback to make the plays. But these are also things I think you accept when you're saying, hey, it's a rookie quarterback. These are the growing pains you're going to go through with him.
Yeah, I think one of the things I talked about with Paul last night was the degree to which some of these decisions are just head scratchers, and you wonder how much of it is coaching and how much of it's the offense, right? For me, some of those 3-yard over the middle throws in overtime, they're not in a good 2-minute offense. They don't really get you much unless you're getting tons of yards after the catch. That's something we've not seen this offense be able to do is pick up 20 yards after those 3-yard over the middle, little dink and dunks. And it just feels like there's kind of a conflict going on, and not just Kenny Pickett's brain, but I think you've seen it with Mitch Trubisky too. Of here are the throws the offense is yielding. Here's what the theory of the offense is, and here is the situation that I'm facing. And I think it's not necessarily indecision. It's just you wonder where the coaching is getting involved there and saying, this is the route that we want. This is what the play design, is calling for, regardless of what the situation is. And I just think it looks very muddled to me right now.
I think I get what you're saying, and I actually agree here with this point. I don't think that the biggest problem with Matt Canada is necessarily the structure of some of these plays. Because people say, oh, there's nobody open. There are guys open. But the part of what an offensive coordinator does, and this is the part that we can't see, we're not privy to, and you can't study on film. But what does the offensive coordinator do with the quarterback behind closed doors? How do they communicate with them to get them and say, hey, this is what you're doing this week, man. Let's go. Let's dig out of this situation. And I think that's just as important as far as what's in your playbook, as much people, and because that's the thing that everyone wants to talk about, because that's what comes across on television. That's what comes across in the all 22. But part of this is also just personality. How do you relate to these guys? How do you get in these guys' faces when they're messing up and say, hey, I challenge you to step up in this moment? That's what Todd Haley did for the Steelers. And and again, we don't have anything official. Like I don't have a story where he did that and we're privy to it. But there's no doubt that Ben Roethlisberger had a way of playing quarterback, and Todd Haley got him to stop playing that way of quarterback. And doing that extended Ben Roethlisberger's career maybe another 5, 6, 7 years, because he was just taking so many hits, wouldn't get the ball out. And then Todd Haley didn't happen right away, but after a couple years, he got Ben to kind of say, hey, let's play this smarter style of football. It's going to protect you. You'll play longer. You'll live longer. And clearly, Todd Haley had that profile, had the experience. Matt Canada is coming from college. This was his first NFL venture. He hasn't had that opportunity. And I can't, again, we can't say that it is or isn't happening. I just don't think it is, based on the results that we've seen from Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. Granted, but it is just one season.
Well, but it's not just one of the other things I said to Paul last night is that this offense, if you take out the running element that Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky have that Ben Roethlisberger didn't, there's a lot of this offense that looks the same to me.
I agree with that.
Yeah, kind of the short stuff, and then maybe you take a couple of downfield shots that they haven't been completing. It looks very similar. I told Paul, and I'll say it again on this video in case you missed it yesterday. I looked down at his stats at one point, I think early in the fourth quarter, before those final 2 drives, and Kenny Pickett had completed 21 out of 26 passes. And I was like, man, it doesn't feel like he's completed 21 out of 26 passes.
I hear you.
But so many of those passes just had no chance to succeed. And I think that's the other, the biggest gripe I have is that with this offense is, where is the ball supposed to go? Where are these quarterbacks told the ball is supposed to go? Because we can sit here and say there's someone open downfield, but if they're being coached to take that shorter route, then how can you, I'm not saying not blame the quarterbacks because they should know, but how can you blame them for not having a muddled message in their head, A? And B, the whole theory of this offense is, in my mind, and this is what we've been told for years before Matt Canada even showed up, is that the Steelers have these explosive playmakers that are going to get the ball and then make plays in open space. Break away after the catch, make those yards that aren't necessarily designed into the offense. You're not going to have like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were at times last night running wild in the secondary. It's just not designed that way. They're supposed to be making plays with their explosiveness. And I haven't seen that ability from these skill players. And I think that's part of the issue as well, is that I just think that the theory of how the Steelers are going to succeed has been and is flawed with the current group of personnel that they have.
I think especially when you look at, the lack of explosiveness, that we've seen as far as explosive plays, and Chase Claypool said this last night. after in the locker room after the game, he said, "You know what?" He's like, "We need more go balls," and I think that's the biggest thing here, as far as as far as if you want to come at play structure. There's not shots downfield that give these guys as many opportunities. There's times where they are deeper down the field, but give them one-on-one chances. This offense, and like you said, the structure of this offense right now is of like you have the chemistry to consistently have long, methodical 12-play drives, and they had a couple of this in the second quarter, but when you have a rookie quarterback, when you have a patchwork offensive line, when you have young offensive playmakers, there's no Hines Ward on this roster. There's no Antonio Brown. There's no guy that you look at and you say he's been here like 8 years and knows the drill and he could carry it. He could carry you through tough moments. There's no Heath Miller on this offense. Everyone's young and learning and still figuring out what they are. And Deontay Johnson, I know, is on his second contract, but still, this is his fourth, fifth year in the league. So again, what are we? That's not the same there. I think a big thing of what they're doing right now, as far as that, they need to give more shot plays, more opportunities where it's like, you don't need, you gave yourself an opportunity once every other drive where Kenny Pickett has a one-on-one opportunity. He launches a ball and you give Chase Claypool, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, whoever, a chance deep down the field where if they come down with it, they have a 50-50 chance of coming down with it. And then after that, they have a chance, if they make one guy miss, it could be a touchdown, or if at worst, it's 30, 40 yards to kind of stretch the field. And those plays just aren't happening enough.
Yeah. I think you're seeing a lot of, when they are getting these chunk plays, it is those 50-50 spectacular catches. Like, it feels like George Pickens makes one of those plays every week because that's sometimes the only opportunity he's getting. And these guys aren't really making guys miss when they have those chances, further up the field. Close to the line of scrimmage. It's only in those situations, and they're not making enough of them because they're not taking enough chances. It feels like, and that, again, you have to know your personnel. And to me, what you're saying, I agree with. These guys are better at those 50-50 balls, those combat catches. Mm-hmm. That was what Ben Roethlisberger was good at, and that's what this offense, when it was successful last season, that's when it was succeeding, when you were getting those shots down the field. They're not taking as many, I think, because of the quarterback situation, because you don't have an 18-year Hall of Famer. And right. So you're putting these guys in positions where you want them to do things that maybe they're not as suited to do, in terms of just using speed and athleticism to get around defenders. It's the NFL. And unless you're a Tyreek Hill, unless you have that speed, those plays are not going to be there like they were for Pitt in 2016. When you had a James Conner or guys like that could make yards after the catch. And I agree with Paul Zeiss on this point. And he said this last night, is that, that's pretty much what the template of what this is supposed to look like, right? And I just don't think the Steelers have enough guys who can make those types of plays at this level of football.
I agree. They aren't. And here's the other thing: is you hit on like 3 or 4 of those, just like where you hit a deep ball. It doesn't have to be 30 yards downfield, but hey, 15, 20 yards sometimes. You hit on a couple of those, then those linebackers and safeties are slowing up. Then they're saying, whoa, wait a second. Am I about to fall for the dipsy and give up a big play here? And then you give Najee Harris more room to run up there, and you don't put as much pressure on the offensive line to block 7, 8 guys instead of 4 or 5 guys. So we'll talk about the defense in a little bit here, and we'll also get into the Steelers standing in the AFC and where they are right now. We'll do that in just a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our friends at Liquid Death. Now, y'all know about Liquid Death. You've been following this show, the North Shore Drive podcast. Liquid Death is the ultimate mountain water spring. And I got to say, this is my last can of Liquid Death that I have with me. I got to go to a store and get some more because this stuff is so good. But it's Liquid Death. You see the can, if you're watching on YouTube, it looks like a Miller Lite. It looks like a tall boy can of beer, but it's not. It's just fresh water in a can. I put it in my fridge and it's ice cold. You bust it out. It's helping you stay hydrated. And if you're wondering, Chris, why is it called Liquid Death? I'm not sure I want to drink something called Liquid Death. That sounds like that's going to mess me up. It's not. Liquid Death is here to murder your thirst and murder plastic pollution, because all Liquid Death just comes in cans, which is better for the environment, and the water is better for you. No plastic residue means better taste and a crisper, fresher taste. When you open it up, you can hear that crack of the can. It sounds just like a beer can when I sip on it. It's fresh water, easy going down, and it's helping me stay hydrated. So go get yourself some Liquid Death right now. You can go to your local Target, your local 7-Eleven, or county fair, anywhere. Liquid Death retailers are also near you. You can find them with a store locator tool located at liquiddeath.com/shore. Again, that's liquiddeath.com/shore. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast, I'm Chris Carter with Adam Bittner of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're breaking things down after the Steelers' 16-10 loss here. We talked a lot about the offense there, but we got to touch on this defense. You know, Adam, it's weird because if you had told me in this game that the Steelers dropped 4 interceptions, got no turnovers, got no sacks, I would have said they got obliterated. I would have said, well, the Dolphins must have had their way. They must have been all over the place on them, crushed them, did everything wrong to them. This must have been a blowout. But they held them to 4 of 14 on third downs, the same percentage, same 29% the Steelers were held to. They stopped them on the lone 4th down. They had 2 red zone stops. And ultimately, they contained an offense that in the first drive, you saw it return to his explosiveness, that it beat the Bills and a lot of other teams to start the season, with that being the Dolphins offense with Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle. But after that, they adjusted. Now, we'll say the second drive, it took a Minkah Fitzpatrick making a hell of a play at the goal line to break that up. But after that, the defense, I thought, adjusted. And I don't know how you allow 16 points in today's NFL without getting all these sacks and getting all these interceptions like they did against the Bengals.
Yeah. It was an impressive performance, not just in terms of adjustment, but in terms of execution. Mm-hmm. I think particularly in run defense, they saw a lot of that outside zone running that Miami was trying to do, and they stopped it. And how many times have we seen them not make that adjustment? This season, but even going back to last season when they struggled so much against the run. So I think that was an encouraging sign. I think for me, the big takeaway with the defense was this offense is not good enough for you not to make those plays when you're this defense. When you're making all the money, you've got to set this offense up in some more favorable situations. That's the one thing the defense failed to do. And it's arguably, the thing that prevented them from scoring more points, the points they needed to win. And I think that's the frustrating part if you're Terrell Austin and if you're some of these guys on defense, is that you can play well, but if you're not at least getting a couple of turnovers and setting this offense up in favorable situations where they don't have to drive the whole field, is it gonna have the outcome you want? And I think we saw last night that that's going to be exhibit A of you can have the defense play well, but the offense, if it has to drive from the opponent's 15-yard line, it's going to be tough. And the defense is going to need to squeeze these interceptions moving forward. They're going to need to, force some fumbles. Well, it just feels like those plays aren't happening with this defense right now. And I think turnovers in football are sometimes puck luck, to use a hockey term. There's not a ton that you can do sometimes to force them, which is why when you have those chances in your hands, you just gotta squeeze it. And I think that was the defense's biggest issue last night, is that it had the chance to change the game and it didn't. And that's, unfortunately, it's not fair, but it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And that's why the Steelers ended up in the outcome they did.
And I do think that, they make some of those plays. This is a completely different game. I do agree with that. But it comes down, and like you say, it comes down to execution, because to me, this shows, and I think we saw this with the last game too. The secondary, when this defense doesn't have to be on the field for 100 plays a game, when they're not mentally and physically exhausted, they can bang with people. I think the biggest, and I said this in all those weeks when the Steelers defense was looking rough, I was like, man, I think this team's just gassed. If you put them on the field, for an average amount of time where the time of possession is pretty even, I think they're going to win a lot more than they lose. And in this game, they did. And here's the thing, Adam, I do agree that, yes, with the way that this team is structured, you need to create turnovers to win games, to give the offense a short field. You need to be able to be that splash team, on defense. But you had a game where you were down 6 points the entire second half. You had the ball 7 times where if you score a touchdown, you win the game. And maybe the Dolphins respond to one of those scoring drives, but you had 2 3-and-outs in the third quarter. One drive where you got a first down. You had a first down in your first drive of the fourth quarter, a 3-and-out, and then a 12-play drive and a 10-play drive that ended interceptions. As much as I agree, you got to be able to get in. You got to be able to make those splash plays. I still give the defense a high grade for simply you held this offense to 16 points when everyone was talking about Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They're like driving sports cars on the freeway and the Autobahn. You can't stop because they're so fast. Like this team that offense is built to light you up. They lit up the Bills this year, and the defense held them in check. As much as I could get on the guys and say, hey, you know what, cornerbacks, safeties, hit the jugs machine. Go work on catching the football this week. I'm not changing the structure of this defense, and that's even with, again, not getting home on the sacks, not doing that. If you could play like that consistently, you're going to win football games. And again, I do also think everything changes once this team gets back TJ Watt after the bye. Granted, I don't think it's going to change in time enough for Philadelphia. I think that's just going to be a bad situation out there in Philly. But again, I like the structure of this defense, what they're doing. And for those who call for adjustments and say that the Steelers don't adjust, they adjusted the heck out of this game and really they held an offense to 3 points for 3 quarters.
Yeah, I think you saw the value of Brian Flores, right? I mean, this was his team a year ago, and he kind of adjusted to stop them. I don't want to take any credit away from what they did. They've come a long way since Buffalo. That night was ugly, and it felt for a time last night like this was going to go in a similar direction. Just because arguably I think Miami has some better playmakers than Buffalo does. They don't have the same guy at quarterback, but I'd love to have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as my starter pack, right? For any offense. So you've got to give them credit for that. I think again they kept Raheem Mostert in check. He looked great.
He looked explosive. They just kept him in check, like you said.
Right. I mean, that speed is hard to match, and they did that. And you have to give them credit for adjusting. It's something they didn't do in some of those games early on. They started to play like the unit that we believed it could be, and that the Steelers have invested in it to be. The problem is that just the bar is just going to be higher, and that's the problem. Is that it's not the defense's fault per se. They're just going to have to play better to bail this team out of some of the situations. Think about the game in Cincinnati, right? I mean, that if
they don't win without those turnovers,
that was Exhibit B. Is if you have to get 5 turnovers and barely win, sometimes that's going to be the bar for this defense. And they, that I'm sure that's something that they know. I'm not telling them something they don't know, but sometimes you just got to grade them on that scale too. Is like, did you do enough to win? Not just did you play well? And I think, some weeks it's going to be frustrating because they're going to play well, but are they going to do enough? And is that going to help, bail out this offense that so badly needs it right now?
Yeah, we could talk about, balancing that, because I think that's the biggest thing here is the Steelers have to find a balance between the struggling offense and the defense, that even they can play really well. They can give you a really good performance and it's still not be enough if you're not getting home, if you're not finishing, and with some of those splash plays. We'll talk about that and how that plays into the Steelers' hopes for the rest of the season in just a minute. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Yinzers in the Berg. Yinzers in the Berg is your number one place to go to for Pittsburgh sports apparel, accessories, and much, much more. So Yinzers, listen up. This is a great time of the year if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan. Yes, the Steelers campaign's off and running. You're seeing the growing pains of Kenny Pickett, but you also got the Pittsburgh Penguins, Crosby, Malkin, Letang. That crew is back. They're in full action. You can get all Pittsburgh sports gear, rooting on your favorite teams in the black and gold by going to Yinzers in the Berg. They've got 2 legendary shops in the Strip District, plus they have an online store that's growing all the time with more merch, more opportunities for you to support your black and gold. So go to Yinzers in the Berg. Again, 2 legendary stops in the Strip District. But if you're not in Pittsburgh right now, if you're out say, hey Chris, I need my swag for the Berg, they got you online. You go to yinzerspgh.com. They will hook you up with all the different gear there. So go to yinzerspgh.com right now for Yinzers in the Berg, your number one place for all your Pittsburgh sports apparel and accessories. back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. Adam, the Steelers, as it stood, if they pulled this game out, I felt like they would have been in a really interesting position in the AFC North, because they would have been a game behind both the Bengals and the Ravens. But with this loss, they're 2-5. They're back to the bottom of the division. They're tied with the Browns, last place in the division. Now they're 2 games back, which isn't insurmountable when you consider, like, in general circumstances in the NFL, teams, climb the rankings like that. But this is a team that you're probably going to be down 3 games next week, because you're playing the undefeated Eagles, who are coming off a bye in Philadelphia, where even the best of Steelers teams haven't won since the 60s. Like that place is just a house of horrors for them. But I look at the Steelers' outlook for this season. They're going to be sticking with Kenny Pickett. I know some people are thinking, well, what about Mitch Trubisky? They're riding that wave. This season is just as much about developing Kenny Pickett as much as it is about finding an identity for this team moving forward.
Yes, and for our viewers on YouTube, I apologize. I'm fighting the sun here in my office. A sunny day in Pittsburgh, PA. But yeah, I really thought they had a chance last night, and they did. And that was the chance they gave themselves, right? Is that despite it all, you had a chance to get to 3-4, and then probably 3-5, where, you can make a plausible argument that you can at least have a respectable season at that point. I think it's going to be tough now. Granted, the schedule does lighten up, and you have some worse teams kind of down the stretch, but those teams are all looking at the Steelers too and saying that's the team we can beat right now. And those teams aren't going to give the Steelers any latitude, because those teams are going to go into those games knowing that the Steelers are the team that they have to beat to reach their goals. And I think that's where they've put themselves. And I think that's sometimes what happens in the NFL is if you fall behind at this point in the schedule and you're in those games where you're the underdog against teams that have something to play for, and you're not the team that has something to play for, that's sometimes how seasons snowball. Even though you're getting TJ Watt back, even though you hope that the offense finds a little more rhythm under Kenny Pickett, that's what they're fighting now. And so that makes next week, I think, pretty crucial. Is it's tough, and they're probably not going to win. But if you can find a way to get to 3-5 and kind of still head into the bye with something to play for, if you get the reinforcements with TJ Watt, I think the tone around this team is different, and you give yourself some belief that you can at least maybe get to 9 wins. With the schedule softening, and with a lot of your division, you're still in decent shape in the division, right? Because you hold the tiebreaker.
This division is mediocre,
right? You hold the tiebreaker on Cincinnati. I think Cleveland's probably you don't hold it on Cleveland, but it's not looking like they're not going to be a factor. And you still have 2 games against the Ravens. If you win those 3 games, Cincinnati at home, the 2 against the Ravens, the whole complexion of the division could look completely different at that point. Which is why I think this week is so important, because you got to get that bonus win somewhere, right? The win you're not expecting to get, or not thinking you have a chance in. You got to get it somewhere, especially because you're so far behind the 8 ball in terms of the tiebreakers in the AFC. Because you've now lost to the Dolphins, you've lost to the Patriots, you've lost to the Jets. These are all AFC teams that's how you break the tie, is with head-to-head, and they've lost these games. So that means you got to beat an NFC team you're not supposed to kind of try to make up for that.
No, I agree with that. I think that you're in a you're in a position where you got to pull off some of these upsets. But and the Eagles, if the Steelers found a way to beat the Eagles, it'd be the most like Mike Tomlin, like where did that come from type of win that we've seen in recent years. I mean, that'd be just right up there as beating the Bengals in this season opener and beating the Bills in last year's season opener, because the Eagles look like an unstoppable force coming out of the NFC, and the only one coming out of the NFC. But like you said, that schedule softens after the break. They get a week off. They'll probably get TJ Watt back. They probably get DeMonte KZ back. If they don't have any other injuries, they might be, this will be the only time they've been 100% all season long. And you get the Saints at home, the Bengals at home, and the Saints, they look just as rough as the Steelers right now, with less hope, because they don't have a defensive MVP coming back, and their quarterback future is Jameis Winston right now. The Bengals, you beat the Bengals in their house. They're coming to Pittsburgh. They're not exactly playing great right now. They hung in there with the Falcons. I thought they had a few very fortunate calls that kind of erased some big mistakes that they had. in that win over them, but they're barely towing above the line. You got the Colts that are not a good team, the Falcons not a good team, the Ravens been so. I thought the Ravens, Adam, were going to run away with this division this year. I thought they were going to be the one AFC North team that kind of set the bar and that everyone was chasing them. And I mean, they're at the top of the division, as far as record-wise at 4-3, but they have been playing well. You got the Panthers who are struggling, the Raiders who are struggling, the Ravens, and then you get the Browns again in Pittsburgh. So those are all games that you put the Steelers in a puncher's chance, but you kind of got to this with the whole record point. You needed to win some of those games earlier in the season, like pull out that close one against the Patriots, pull out the close one against the Jets, or the close one against the Dolphins. You pull out one or two of those, you're in a situation, or even the Browns, because even though that ended up not being close because of the last play of the game, it was still really a one-possession football game. You split those, just win two of those games instead of losing all four of them. Then all of a sudden, you're 4-4, and when you're in a puncher's chance with a lot of those teams late in the season, you don't have to win all of them. That means all you have to do is win like 5 or 6 of them. And then you're saying, well, wait a second, that 5 or 6 out of 9, like that's not that bad of a proposition. And I think that's where they could have been at this point. But right now you're looking at being 2-6. Now we need to win 7 of those games, 8 of those games. And that's just asking a lot from this team that doesn't know who they are offensively, is still looking to develop Kenny Pickett and see how he responds from rough games like this one. And, ultimately also still needs to get healthy.
Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's in some ways it feels like that the season was kind of already short circuited, and that just the way things shook out. You needed those wins early to be able to take advantage of the schedule late. And now that hasn't happened, how does this team respond? How do they, go? How do they go into the December 24th game? I think it is against Las Vegas. If you have no chance. Right. And how does that game, how do the circumstances that lead up to that game affect how that game is played? And I think that's what we're going to find out this is where we're going to find out about Mike Tomlin, because keeping that winning season or not losing season streak going, that's going to be tough. But can they at least take advantage of this late part of the schedule, even though these games technically aren't going to matter, unless they go on really a crazy run and get themselves back in contention. Yeah, it would take a crazy run at this point. But to me, you're going to find out a lot about Mike Tomlin, because if he can keep this team motivated, and let's say you get those 4 or 5 wins that you were hoping were going to get you to 9 or 10 wins, but now they might just get you to like 7 wins.
Right.
But if you still get them after the season already looks lost, what does that tell you about Mike Tomlin, his ability to keep these guys motivated, his ability to keep them locked in and things like that. I
not lose the locker room.
What'd you say? Right.
To not lose the locker room. Yeah.
And can you not lose it? And I think if he can do that, I think that says a lot about his ability as a coach and his ability to take this group forward, get some more draft picks in here, build up some of that depth in places that it was frankly depleted by Ben Roethlisberger's contract being on the books for so long.
Yeah.
By the trades you made to try to keep those Ben Roethlisberger teams competitive. I mean, the Steelers are paying for that, right? To some degree. Is that we all said win now. Well, this is what happens when you've done that. And so the question for me now is, like I said, can Mike Tomlin get the best out of this team, even if the best is not what we've become accustomed to in recent years? And if he can, I think you feel, because I've told you, I think before, and I'll say it again, I've been looking at the Steelers as a 2-year project pretty much from the start of the season. Because they went into the season with some key weaknesses and some key spots that you knew they were going to have to probably address in free agency and the draft this coming off season. And would you like to see them closer to 500 now on that timeline? Sure. But I think you can still be a good team by the end of next year when it really counts. When you can really start maximizing the window with Kenny Pickett and his rookie contract. I think there's still a chance, but we need to see that down the stretch against these teams, to believe that you can get that 2-year plan back on track.
I do agree. This is about the long game. This isn't about the short game. And the good thing about this is that this is a young team. For as much as you're right, the Steelers invested in winning now. They tried to make a lot of moves to make that happen. there's so much of this team that's in their early to mid 20s. Even, I mean, Minka Fitzpatrick is 25 years old. Even Terrell Edmonds, who feels like he's been here for 8 years, he's 25 years old. There's a lot of guys that you can say, hey, you can be part of the core moving forward and be playmakers. And, I think like George Pickens, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, guys like that. Even Chukuma Okorafor, who, he's your highest paid offensive lineman. He's James Daniels. Like, those guys are young. If you wanted to keep a couple offensive linemen to kind of be the mainstay guys while you invest and go get the bigger name guys or the high drafted guys, you have those core young pieces. And of course, then you have Kenny Pickett at 24 years old. I really think that there's something there. And this is all about the long game, as Adam said. But still, you got to live in the now. You got to operate in the now. You got to get ready for these Philadelphia Eagles. We'll talk about that more as this week rolls along. I'll have Jason Mackey on the Wednesday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast. Then we'll be back at the end of the week previewing for that game. So stay tuned at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We've got all your coverage of the Pittsburgh Steelers and everything going on. Adam, thanks for joining me on the show. It's always a pleasure to get to chat it up with you. We haven't done this in a bit because we've been rotating all the Steelers guys in here. But sometimes travel gets in the way, so we gotta make some adjustments. So I appreciate you making time. Thanks again for checking out the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. You can check us both out at Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Go check us out online. Also check out this show, the North Shore Drive podcast, on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and especially YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily content coming out right here on this channel. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down below in the description.